Hi you guys, it's Polyglot Lollipop again coming at you with another language-based video. This video is going to be about my top tips for learning languages fast or learning a language fast. I want to talk about the things that actually don't work, and then I want to talk about the things that actually do work. When we're exposed to a language as children, the usual practice is not to have a whole bunch of grammar, to have huge conjugation charts and flashcards. We listen to context, we listen to the material, and then we repeat it and we say it to ourselves again and again and again. In some way, that's one of the best ways to learn the language. So I'm going to talk about some great tips and tricks and things that I've used in my own language learning journey that have been very helpful for me, and that hopefully practicing will be helpful for you. These are going to seem a little bit eccentric. I know that the things that I'm going to talk about sound a little bit eccentric and probably different than how a lot of other people would do it, but this is how I've done it, and this is the way that I've gotten close to sounding as native as possible. So the very first thing is just to understand that at its base, all language is musicality. Let me explain what I mean by that. Every single language has intonation, it has tone, it has a certain rhythm. If you want to sound native and achieve fluency, then the best thing to do would be to first understand what the specific musicality of the language is. So let me give you guys some examples on that. Right now, I'm speaking English, and the rhythm of English is somewhat like this. Right? North American English in particular. But if you're talking about another language, like the Spanish language, for example, it has a completely different intonation, has a completely different musicality. So, estoy hablando acerca de eso, o si yo estoy hablando acerca de este tema, es la manera que yo voy a hablar acerca de. And so the musicality for Spanish is so if you keep to that rhythm, if you understand the innate rhythm of the Spanish language, before you understand any other words and vocab, if you get the way that the Spanish sounds, that's going to be really, really huge. La manera que uno se encuentra las palabras que uno tiene, así, 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 hasta el punto que... Right? And I would say the French is somewhat like this. Quand je dors, la 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 la. La 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 la. Alors. But then the German language is a lot more terse in its rhythm. Boom, 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 boom. Anyway, the whole idea here is that every single language that you're learning will have a natural rhythm or a natural intonation or a natural beat. This is step number 2. Find out what the first 100 most common verbs are in the language. Like, for instance, to say, to do, to know, to have, to be. 100 most common verbs and how they're conjugated. That's going to be so, so huge. And I think that this is even more important than certain vocabulary sets or vocabulary lists. A vocabulary list is going to tell you all the things that are in the house or all of the words for foods. But if you want to get into just jumping into making sentences, then the best thing to do would be to find the most common verbs, find how to conjugate those words for common pronouns, speaking about yourself, speaking about others, and then use those verbs to create other sentences. Number 3, start getting used to using full-on sentences, and you can do that by things like using Linguee. You can take Linguee, copy and paste what you find there, and then go to DeepL, which is an AI translator, and listen to how it sounds. Say those things over and over, whether it's like a newspaper, whether it's an article from online, whether it was a speech, whatever it was. Find out how to say it and just start repeating huge paragraphs from that. That'll help you get into the idea of how the language sounds and using it with full-on sentences as opposed to using small baby words, 1 word by 2 words by 3 words, right? Another great tip that I would say coming in at number 3 or number 4 is sleep with the language playing. As much as you can create, as much as you can manufacture a learning experience where you're hearing the language all the time, I swear by slow Spanish podcasts, slow Italian podcasts, slow French podcasts, and just listen to it like as much as you possibly can. Listen to as much music as you possibly can. Watch as many films as you possibly can. I really love the service FluentU. It's a paid service, but I think it's totally worth it. Watch music videos, watch cooking shows, like manufacture an environment of immersion as much as you possibly can. Number 5 tip for getting fluent is not trying to make sense out of what you're learning. There really is no sense, quote unquote. It's kind of confirmation bias for us. We think that what we learn as our first language is rational, and it's not really rational. We just think that it's rational because it's our first language. So, like, to give you an example, we might think that the way that Spanish speakers describe hunger or time is like very odd, right? Like having two forms of to be, like ser and estar. Or talking about hunger is something that they have as opposed to something that they are. Like an English person would say, I'm hungry, whereas someone who's speaking Spanish would say, tengo hambre o tengo sed. But we have to remember that other people learning our language also think that it doesn't make a lot of sense. One thing that Spanish speakers say is, it's really weird. Like, how do you say red house? Like, how do you paint a house before you build it? It should be casa first and then roja. House that is red instead of red house. So don't try to make sense of things. Like, get comfortable with approximation. Find out what the equivalent is of whatever that you want to say. There's a transliteration, which means word for word what something is, and then there's a translation where you're looking for equivalents. Seek equivalence above any other thing. Get really, really comfortable with things being approximate, because it's never going to be an exact translation. Get used to coming close enough to what you want to say in the other language. Every language is unique, and so every single time you think about speaking another language, this is my final tip, think about like being a different person. Think about having a different personality. In one language, you might have to be more blunt, and in another language, you might be more flowery with your language. In one language, you might be more comical and have language that is more about levity and lightheartedness, and another one that might be very serious. See yourself as being a different person in every single language that you speak. Be willing to put on the persona of someone that speaks that language. Thinking that way helps you to kind of differentiate who you are as a person and then who you have to be when you're speaking that language. And that goes into culture a lot too, and I'll probably talk about that in other videos. But yeah, those are my biggest tips. Let me know how this goes. And for more language learning tips and tricks, keep it locked and like and subscribe for more. Talk to you guys soon. Bye.